Hey everyone, how's it going? It's Matt from The Pen Habit, and as you can tell from the scenery, I am not in my dining room. I've moved over into the control room of my little recording studio here, and thought it might be fun to do a little Q&A. So several days ago, I posted something on Twitter, Facebook, just saying, hey, if you've got any questions, send them to me. I got a few. I'm no Brian Goulet, though, so I don't get quite as many as he does. But figured I'd go through my questions here and talk a little bit, see if I can't bore y'all to death. So I'm just going to start right at the top of my list. Island Sounds from YouTube said on the review of the Monteverde Impressa I did, is it true that the finish on this pen is cheap? I read a few reviews that stated that the finish wears off. So the Monteverde Impressa was one of my top 5 pens for 2014 when I did it in February of this year. I like the pen a lot. It's $40 here in the US. Unique colors, nice design. Mine had a great nib on it. But a lot of people have complained that the finish on the pen will flake off or come off. I haven't experienced that. I've inked mine up 5 or 6 times since I got it. And I haven't had any issues with it at all. It still looks brand new. It still writes wonderfully. So for me, it's been a great pen. I bought one for my father though, and he put it in his. He's got one of those boxes, the glass top boxes that'll hold 10 pens. Got it on Amazon for $40 or something like that. And he left it in the case for a few weeks, and when he pulled it out, the finish had actually bubbled off of the metal. And it started flaking off. So unfortunately, it does seem like there are some finish issues with the Monteverde Impressa. Now, I haven't experienced them personally, but I've heard enough people say that it is an issue that to be able to ignore it. Now, the one thing I will say is what I would suggest if you still want a pen, and I would say for $40, give it a try because it's still a freaking great pen. Buy it from a retailer you trust and that has a pretty good policy on accepting returns. If the pen starts to flake or something like that, some retailers may say, yeah, send it back in, up to a certain point. They won't support it for 10 years or anything like that. But I suspect if you can make it through 3 months of steady use without any issues, it's probably going to remain fine throughout the life of the pen. Just a guess, but there you go. Will it make the top 5? Will the Impressa make the top 5 next year in 2015 when I do my top 5 pens? Probably not. It's still a great pen and a great pen for the value, but I've come across a few others I like a little bit more. All right. Next email, or the next thing, came from Paul Joins via email, and Paul writes, there are many aftermarket nib units available from Edison, TWSBI, Franklin Christoph, etc. Are these nib unit assemblies interchangeable in certain brands of pen? Short answer is yes, with a but. It depends on the pen. It depends on the nib, obviously. Most of those companies you mentioned use standard size nibs. So the two that are most common are the standard number 6 size, which is the larger of the two, and then the standard number 5 size nib. And I know both Edison and Franklin Christoph use the standard number 6 and the standard number 5 in their pens. TWSBI, to the best of my knowledge, just uses the number 6, but I could be wrong about that. Edison actually uses both of those. Monteverde also has a standard number 6 size nib. The nibs from the Goulet Pen Company are number 6 size nibs as well. And most of these nibs are actually made by the same company or companies. So for the most part, they are interchangeable. Now, a lot of these nib units will come with a little plastic sleeve that holds a nib and a feed together, and you can just screw the nib out of the pen and put a new one in. You may not always be able to replace the nib that way. You may actually have to pull the nib out, pull the nib and feed out of that little plastic sleeve to put it in a different pen. But almost all of the Chinese pens that I've gotten have come with a standard size number 6. I've gotten one that came with a non-standard size nib and one that came with a standard number 5 nib, but most of them come with a number 6 size nib. So you can replace a Jinhao nib or some Hero nibs, etc., with a nib from Goulet, from Franklin Christoph, from Edison. So short answer is yes, you can, but it's not 100%. If you have a specific pen that you're trying to look into swapping the nib out and you want to ask specifics, let me know. I can probably at least make a really educated guess. A really good way to tell if a nib's going to be swappable with another pen is, with the exception of Lamy, does the retailer, or does the manufacturer rather, sell nib units separately from the pen? Most of the time, if they do, then that nib is going to be a fairly standard size and you can swap it out. Pelican probably isn't. I know you can buy the nib separately, but that's pretty uncommon. For the most part, retailers that don't use standard size nibs or have their own specialty nib shapes don't sell the nibs separately from the pens. It's just a real rough rule of thumb there. All right. No Future, No Hope wrote on Facebook, we want to see more of the t-shirts, not just the first sentence or words. Okay, well, ask and ye shall receive. So despite the fact that I am a 36-year-old man, I still have a deep and abiding love for the graphic t-shirt, especially if it's funny. And I am fortunate enough that I work in the tech industry on the west coast of the United States, which has very lax rules. So these are actually things I get to wear to work. It's nice. This is my graphic designer photographer shirt. Oh, crop. I no longer hear the voices in my head. Fun little shirt there. Hey, do you ever get the feeling you're just another face on some ironic t-shirt? A very meta shirt. This is one that I think is funny, but I don't think anyone else does. It's just the people who wear their college shirts. It's like, go college. Irony, the opposite of wrinkly. This is one I wear when I run. Exercise, some motivation required. I like this one a lot too. Dear Karma, I have a list of people you missed. This is a geek shirt. So it says awesomeimage.jpg, and then it has the little broken image thing. And then since Halloween's coming up, I figured I'd get a Quoth the Raven Nevermore shirt, which I just love the design on this one. I've got several others as well, but some of them are in the washer or dryer at the moment. So, but I probably shouldn't wear those shirts as much as I do, but I just can't help myself. I like them. Let's see. Sharjeel Tai wrote, other than fountain pens, is there anything else you enjoy collecting? And depending on how you define collecting, I'm not sure I would even consider myself a fountain pen collector. I'm a fountain pen user, but I don't treat my collection with the same level of, for lack of a better term, reverence or focus that most collectors do. For me, acquiring the pen is the fun part. Once I have the pen, I'm just not attached to things very much. I have a couple of exceptions when it comes to my pens, but for the most part, my pens just don't have much of an attraction to me. And so as a result, no, I don't really collect anything. I mean, I have a lot of fountain pens and I have a lot of ink, but I don't collect things. I'm certainly not in that try to get one of every color or try to collect every era or every style or anything like that. So I spend most of my money on either pens or food. I love me some food. So I spend a lot of money on food, but that's not really a collection per se. Kind of along those lines, let's see. Emilio Villegas, hopefully I pronounced that right, said, do you have any other bank account destroying hobbies? And then he says, I have photography. I have had photography, and I have some pretty nice camera equipment. Here's the thing with me and hobbies. So I have a bit of an addictive personality. I'm also one of those people who likes to skip the entry steps. I don't really do entry level on anything or exploration or part way. It's like, I'm going to borrow a friend's guitar to see if I like playing it. No, I'm going to go out and buy a bass and 2 guitars because I'm crazy and I make bad decisions. And so I have had the other thing about me as a person is I love to fill my time with projects and hobbies, and I love learning new things. To me, that's where most of my happiness comes from, is getting to learn something and finding that I'm good at something or I enjoy something, and then diving in deep. So almost every hobby, in fact, I would go so far as to say there is not a hobby in existence that can't be wallet destroying and bank account melting if you do it right. So some of the hobbies I have delved into in the past include video, audio. I have a studio in my house. I play several instruments, mostly piano, and I sing, but I also kind of play the guitar and the trumpet and a few wind instruments. I really enjoy photography. I don't do it as much as I used to, but I enjoyed doing it when I did. I narrate audiobooks for fun and also for profit. I have recently become addicted to loose leaf teas and some rather expensive ones and herbal infusions and things like that. I tried the double-edged safety razor, old-timey badger brush and mug shaving. That one didn't really hit home for me, but of course it was after I'd already spent $200 on new gear. Really, the only hobby that I'm into at the moment that hasn't cost me far more money than it should have is running. I started running about 2 months ago to lose some weight and get healthy again. I got tired of being out of breath by climbing a flight of stairs. And so I started running, and I went 2 months of running on just the shoes I had before I was like, I'm going to make sure I stick with it before I invest, which is very unusual for me. Usually I just go ahead and invest and then find out I don't like it. And this time around, I ran for 2 months, 3, 4, 5 times a week. And once I made to the 2-month mark, then I went out and got a real pair of shoes, and I'm in the process of starting to get the running gear now. That's kind of where my hobbies are at the moment. I'm so busy. I wish I had more time to play with my hobbies, but as it is, I barely have time to use my pens anymore. I'm so busy with recording the videos and recording audiobooks that audiobook projects that I'm working on, and gardening around my house and things like that. So yes, I have many, many bank account melting, wallet destroying hobbies, and I'm sure I will pick and drop off several more along the way. Sudhir, I'm sorry, I can't read that from here because I don't have my glasses on. Sudhir Kalvenikar. Oh, I apologize, Sudhir. Sudhir Kalvenikar. Asks, I heard you mention in one of your reviews that your day job is operations manager. I have a similar day job in the IT industry that hardly leaves me enough time to spend with my family, much less enjoy my pens. To the extent you are comfortable, could you share more about your work, education, professional training, etc., and how you manage to take so much time out for your reviews? And then goes on to say some very nice things. So, Sudhir, let me back up a little bit, because my route into the technology industry is rather circuitous and not at all what one would believe. So my undergraduate degree is in musical theater, and I worked as a working actor, singer, and dancer for several years before I got tired of being poor. So that's what I did for a while. I taught voice for the musical theater department at the university from which I graduated, and still obviously have a lot of need to be out there and get attention because I do all these reviews. I love it. I loved doing theater. I met some wonderful people, but it's a really, really hard life to live. So after I did theater for several years, I did a little bit of film and television. I think the most well-known thing people might have heard of is the TV show Touched by an Angel. I did an episode of that once in the final season 9, I think it was. You can see the back of my head as the camera pans past, and you can hear my voice in the soundtrack. But other than that, most of what I did was cut out. So that was how I got started. Then after I retired from performing back when I was 28, 29, I guess it was 28, I moved to Seattle with a friend. Just wanted a change of scene, didn't have a job, didn't have a place to stay. Got a job at Microsoft, working at Microsoft Studios, which they have a huge video production facility there. And I worked at the front desk, scheduling camera people and grips and gaffers and editors and the editing suites and the studio spaces and all that fun stuff, the sound stages. While I did that, I went back to school and got an MBA in project management. And so I now work for a small tech company in my area. And I work as, my title changes, it seems like every 6 months. My current title is not director, I wish. It's manager, development operations manager. And I also do program management. So for those not familiar with the IT world, operations can mean a couple of different things. What Sudhir is probably talking about is actually setting up the servers, managing security, making sure everything runs, keeping monitoring in place to make sure sites stay up and everyone can access what they do, making sure hard drives on the servers don't crash or fail, that sort of thing. That's not what I do. I do more of the, we do several products at the company I work for. And so my team is responsible for launching the products, doing the technical integration, providing support, doing web design and production design. Recently, I've handed a lot of that off to one of my guys, and instead I'm focusing on managing actual development projects. So I'm more focused on the company's consumer front end UI UX side of development. Now, I'm not a developer myself. I just speak enough of the language and try to be organized. I'm the one who communicates to the different parts of the company, not necessarily the one who does the coding. So how I'm able to spend my time doing other things has a lot to do with the fact that the company I work for really, really understands and respects the work-life balance, which is probably the single most important thing for me about a company. We don't do the 70-hour work week kind of things. It's just not in the makeup of the company. It's a small company, only been around for about 7 years. So they really tried to start it off right and not get an ecosystem where you're spending, where you're working 2 full-time jobs but only getting paid for one. So that's really been great, and I like that a lot. So that's basically how I get to do it, and then that gives me some free time to work on all my other hobbies and side projects and things like that. Tristan writes, best fountain pen trick cleaning trick, using trick, magic trick, your choice. Well, Tristan, not to be flippant, but really the best trick I've seen fountain pens do is bring me to the verge of bankruptcy. They do that really well, actually, I've discovered. It's funny because I've not been using fountain pens for very long, about 1.5 years now, as I've said several times. And so a lot of the tricks and tips and things that people have learned over time, I'm still learning as I go along as well. I will say that the thing that has probably made the biggest difference for me in my YouTube hobby, or but in my pen habit, my pen hobby, is learning how to smooth pens. And mostly I just learned by watching Brian Goulet's video, watching Stephen Brown's video, and watching the FP Geeks video podcast that Brian Gray was on. It's like a 2-hour podcast where they talked about how to smooth nibs. And then reading some of the reference material that Richard Binder has put out. So that's how I learned, and then just practicing. Now I have this unfortunate habit of practicing on really expensive pens instead of practicing on inexpensive pens, which is something I would not recommend to most people. But honestly, that for me is the best thing about fountain pens, is that they're so adjustable, and you can make almost any pen write well with enough time and patience and a little bit of know-how. And it's not really even that much know-how. It takes a little bit of patience to get there. I've had several folks actually ask me if I would do videos on how to smooth and adjust nibs. And honestly, I'm not really sure there's a whole lot of value in me doing that, because I'm not sure there's a whole lot more that I can add to the information that's already out there. So I may do that at some point, but honestly, at this point, I mostly just say, go see Stephen Brown's video, go see Brian Goulet's videos, go watch the FP Geeks podcast that talks about smoothing nibs, and you're going to be basically at the same place I am, maybe just a tiny bit less experience, but about the same place. Okay, next question. Rob Pine writes, if you could design your own custom ink, what would it look like and what would the properties be? Okay, well, if we're living in Fantasyland, I would design it would be a purple ink, probably honestly about the color of this shirt, although it looks kind of blue in the video. It's actually a purple shirt. Very dark purple, very rich purple. Just a tiny slight hint of a red undertone. My favorite ink is purple ink is currently De Atramentis Aubergine, or Aubergine, depending on how you pronounce it, which is kind of an eggplanty color, but it's a little more red than that. But it's that really deep, rich color. The De Atramentis inks tend to run really wet, though, and this one is a very wet ink. Very lubricated, great ink flow. But because of that, it doesn't shade very much. So I would say I'd like a smooth flowing, really rich, deep, jewel tone purple ink, kind of like a Blue John quartz or something like that, that had some really solid shading and like a gold sheen. I love sheen. I love sheen, and especially since I use Tomoe River paper so commonly, I get to see a lot of it because ink sheens really nicely on that paper. But you know, it's interesting with purples. I've used several, but I've yet to find one that's really this kind of solid, rich, deep, saturated purple, but that still has a little bit of shading. Now, I understand fully that all of those properties together are pretty much impossible. You usually have to give up one to get something of the other. You can't get a super saturated that shades well, or a really wet ink that shades well because it's all wet, or, you know, a specific color of purple but with gold shading. You know, I get it, but if I were living in a fantasy land, that's probably what I would go for. I think purple inks are not found as often as they ought to be. Not used as often as they ought to be. Really great color. I like purple inks a lot. Green is my favorite color for inks, but I feel like the spectrum of green is pretty well covered. And in terms of permanence or bulletproofness or waterproofness, I don't really care about that stuff. So it doesn't, if there's any ink manufacturer out there who wants to try to make my fantasy ink, by all means, don't worry about the waterproofness. That I don't care about that so much. All right, let's see. Along those lines, Joseph writes, what is your favorite pen, ink, paper combo? So I don't have, basically, all of my writing gets done on either Tomoe River, which is I use the paper for fountain pens journal for my journal, personal journal, and I use the writing pads for letters. I have just gotten a Franklin Christoph, one of their seconds, or one of their outlet, you know, the cover is slightly damaged, of their sugarcane paper. I like that a lot. I may spend a little more time investing some energy in that. But other than that, almost exclusively, I use Clairefontaine spiral bound notebooks or Rhodia spiral bound notebooks. I used to be really big into the Rhodia web notebooks, and I still have a couple I haven't used, so I'm sure I'll go back to those. But I just love the Tomoe River paper so much that's kind of taken over for the Rhodia webbies. So yeah, in terms of paper, the best for me is always going to be Tomoe River. I have yet to come across another paper I like anywhere near as much as I like that. In terms of pen and ink combos, it's funny because I know a lot of people will use the same ink in the same pen over and over and over again. And I think in the last year and a half, I have only ever re-inked a pen with the same ink that was already in it one time. I just have so many. I mean, I'd say probably at least a third of my inks I've never even used yet. So I don't really get the luxury of going back to the same ink over and over and over again in the same pen. Likewise, I rarely use the same pen for more than one fill because I've got so many pens I want to get through and that I really like using that it feels a little. I feel bad about not using some of the other pens a little more often. In terms of favorites, my favorite pen right now is still my Stipula Etruria Rainbow. Unfortunately, it is somewhere between California and Italy for repair because in trying to remove the nib unit, I managed to cause the plastic sleeve that holds the nib and the feed together to crumble. And Jaffa, the distributor here in the US, either didn't have or wouldn't give me a replacement plastic sleeve. So they had to send it off to Italy for repair, which I'll be without it for 6 months. And, hopefully I'll see it again at some point. Well, fingers crossed. And hopefully while it's over in Italy, they don't replace my wonderful, amazing nib that I spent so much time fine tuning with a new nib. It's like, send me my nib back, please, please, Stipula. And I like that Diatramentus Aubergine in that pen because the nib on the Stipula is just gorgeous. It is probably the smoothest nib ever that anyone has ever made ever. That has more to do with the fine tuning I did with it than it does with the nib. Although it was very smooth when I got it, I fine tuned it to really my perfect level of smoothness. And that ink is so lubricated and flows so nicely that it's one of those that if you aren't careful, you're just going to slip right off the edge of the paper, which I know some people don't like. They like to feel the nib on the paper. I am not one of those people. So I'd say that would probably be for pen and ink combo my favorite. Aside from that, most of my inks that I use often, I really like, and it doesn't really matter what pen I put them in. So yeah, there you go. And then Koa Nguyen, I'm sorry, I can't ever pronounce those. I think that's a Vietnamese name. Nguyen, yeah, sorry. I'm sure if you've watched my videos by now, international pronunciations are a bit of a struggle for me. Being an American, I don't speak multiple languages because it's not required here. And the high school I went to was a very small high school. We had one Spanish teacher and one French teacher. Neither one of them were great teachers. And the pace of I took Spanish for a year and a half, and the pace of the class that I was in was just painfully slow. So after a year and a half, I went and did something else for an elective. And that was fine. Here language isn't required because you can go your whole life and never have to not speak English. I wish I had spent more time, or I wish I had more opportunity to learn a language. But now that I'm living on the West Coast, I really maybe should pick up Mandarin or something like that. That might be fun. Anyway, Koa asks, which pen do you suggest for daily writing among the price up to $200? I prefer the classic look, not something like Lamy or Kaweco. So I get a lot of variations of this question, as I suppose do most people who do fountain pen videos or open themselves up to Q&A. If you go to the Reddit fountain pen forum, it seems, like every other post is, what pen should I get? And it's such a personal thing. It's really hard for me to answer questions like this. Pens to look at, though, Koa, in that range would include that are more classically styled, which would be like more the cigar shaped pens. I'd look at the Platinum 3776, which I think is a very underrated pen. It's a great pen, and I like it a lot. Anything from Sailor in that price range, like a Sailor 1911, would probably be good. I've not had the opportunity to use many of the Pilot pens in that range, but like the Pilot Custom 74, Custom 91, Custom 92, those, depending on where you get them from, would be in the $100 to $150 range. But if it were me, probably at $150 to $200, the pens I would be aiming for would be either Edison pens or Franklin Christoph pens. I think those two American companies have pens that, for me, are the most interesting. Edison has classic shapes but unique materials. So if you're looking for like a standard classical profile to your pen, but maybe you'd be okay with a nice swirly resin, Edison might be a company you'd want to look at. If you're interested in kind of a little bit more contemporary design of a pen, look at maybe Franklin Christoph, but because they have some really unique designs, very different than a lot of other pens you see on the market, but their materials are more understated. You might want to look at like the Pelican 200. I don't know how big a pen you would like. A Pelican 200, that's a little small for me, but might fit what you're looking for. And the other thing is, don't ignore vintage pens, because you can, for $200, you can find some really, really nice vintage pens in good materials, in great shape, that have been restored. So, spend some time on eBay, look for sellers that have a really high rating, that have explained what the restoration has been on the pen, and that show a writing sample. And I think you'll be happy with some of those. So, if you end up with any of those or something else, let us know what you end up with. So, okay, well, I think that's going to do it for the questions this time around. I'll be keeping a kind of a note, an Evernote note of other questions that come up. So if you have questions, you can leave them on the comments of this video, put them on the comments, or send them to me at penhabit@gmail.com, tweet them to me, etc. So yeah, and that'll be it this time. I have coming up some more reviews. I've got one more that still needs to be edited, that's recorded and still needs to be edited, and about 4 or 5 pens that need, well, I actually think it's technically 6, but 2 of them are the same model of pen that need to be recorded, and will probably be recorded not this coming weekend, which it's Thursday when I record this. It'll probably not this weekend, but the weekend after. So there'll be more videos coming up soon, and eventually I will be able to get back to doing some more ink reviews as well, because my pen buying, going along with that whole wallet melting, bank account destroying, bankruptcy inducing hobby thing of mine, I'm putting my pen purchasing on hold for a few months while I focus on some work around the house that needs to be done. So as I wrap up the pens that I have for review, I will get those videos up, and then I'm going to start heading back to some of the more in-depth ink reviews that I've been doing in the past. So thank you very much, as always, for watching. And as I say every time, we will see you here next time on The Pen Habit.